During the Cold War, secrecy was not an exception, but a routine. Thousands of documents were classified every year, most of them ordinary, some of them dangerous, and a few so sensitive that their existence was denied altogether. One such document would remain hidden for decades, not because it revealed a single dramatic secret, but because it exposed a failure no one wanted to admit. The document was created quietly, without urgency or public attention. It was not written during a crisis or in response to an emergency. It emerged from routine intelligence analysis, compiled by experienced officers who believed they were simply recording facts for internal use. At the time, no one involved imagined that these pages would become untouchable. What made the document different was not its content alone, but its implications. It did not accuse an enemy of aggression. It did not reveal a secret weapon or a covert operation. Instead, it questioned assumptions that had guided intelligence planning for years. It suggested that a fundamental assessment had been wrong. This was dangerous. Intelligence systems are built on continuity. They rely on shared beliefs, established models, and long-standing interpretations of adversary behavior. When a document challenges those foundations, it does more than inform. It destabilizes. The authors of the document were cautious. The language was restrained, analytical, and deliberately unemotional. Conclusions were supported by data, cross-referenced sources, and historical comparison. There was no speculation, no dramatic language, only a quiet warning that prevailing interpretations no longer matched reality. At first, the document circulated normally. Senior analysts reviewed it, added annotations, and forwarded it up the chain. Some readers recognized its significance immediately. Others dismissed it as overly cautious or methodologically narrow. Disagreement was expected. What followed was not. Instead of debate, silence emerged. Meetings where the document should have been discussed were postponed. References to its conclusions disappeared from briefings. Follow-up requests were quietly redirected. Without formal rejection or approval, the document began to vanish from the system. This was deliberate. Admitting the document's conclusions would have required acknowledging that years of policy, planning, and intelligence judgment had been built on flawed assumptions. It would have raised questions that had no safe answers. Responsibility would have been impossible to assign. So the document was classified at a higher level. Then higher still. Access was restricted not because of external threat, but because of internal risk. The risk was not that the enemy would see it. The risk was that decision-makers would. Over time, the document stopped being referenced at all. New analysts were never told it existed. Older officers learned not to mention it. The intelligence system adapted by forgetting. Officially, nothing changed. Unofficially, everything did. This was the beginning of a silence that would last for decades. As the document circulated quietly within restricted circles, its impact became increasingly difficult to contain. The information it presented did not contradict existing intelligence outright. Instead, it reframed it. Familiar facts were reorganized into a structure that suggested a different interpretation of long-standing assumptions. This made the document dangerous. It did not expose secrets. It questioned certainty. Senior analysts struggled with how to categorize it. It was not raw intelligence. It was not an operational plan. It was an internal analytical synthesis, built from verified sources, cross-checked data, and long-term observation. That made it harder to dismiss. The document did not accuse. It implied. What unsettled reviewers most was its conclusion. The assessment suggested that a key, strategic assumption guiding policy for years might be fundamentally flawed, not because of deception by the opposing side, but because of how information had been interpreted under pressure. The document argued that consistency had been mistaken for intent, and routine had been misread as preparation. This created immediate discomfort. If the document was correct, then previous decisions had not been reckless, but unnecessary. That distinction mattered. Recklessness could be blamed on individuals. Unnecessity pointed to the system itself. Accepting the document's conclusions would mean admitting that years of policy had been driven by misinterpretation rather than threat. The response was cautious. Distribution was limited further. Discussions were confined to closed sessions. Language softened. Instead of addressing the document's conclusions directly, officials debated its tone, its framing, and its potential implications if misunderstood. The focus shifted from what the document said to what it might cause. That shift was deliberate. Some officials argued that the document, while analytically sound, posed a strategic risk. If its conclusions influenced decision-making, they could reduce readiness. Reduced readiness could be misread by adversaries. And misinterpretation, ironically, was the very danger the document warned against. Others countered that ignoring the assessment carried its own risk. If assumptions were wrong, continuing to act on them increased the likelihood of escalation based on false premises. The debate was not about truth. It was about consequence. No consensus emerged. As weeks passed, the document remained classified not because it was false, but because it was destabilizing. It challenged narratives that had become institutional. It questioned threat models that justified budgets, deployments, and doctrines. Releasing it, even internally, risked weakening alignment. Gradually, the document was removed from active discussion, not formally rejected, simply set aside. New assessments were produced that avoided its conclusions, without directly contradicting them. Its existence faded from daily awareness, but its influence did not disappear. Analysts who had read it began approaching their work differently. Language became more careful. Assumptions were questioned more quietly. The document introduced doubt where certainty had once been routine, and that doubt, once introduced, could not be fully erased. The document remained classified, not because it revealed secrets, but because it changed how secrets were understood. By the time the document reached senior leadership, its existence was already considered a liability. The information it contained was not explosive in a conventional sense. It did not reveal a single dramatic operation or expose a specific individual. Instead, it outlined a pattern. Long-term assessment that challenged assumptions both sides had relied on for years. The problem was not what the document proved, but what it implied. The analysis suggested that a series of past decisions had been based on misinterpretation rather than intent. Signals once believed to indicate aggression were reclassified as defensive routines. Actions interpreted as preparation were now seen as reactions. The document quietly dismantled a narrative that had justified escalation, funding, and strategic pressure. This created immediate discomfort. If the document were acknowledged, it would raise questions no one wanted to answer. Why had certain operations been approved? Why had warnings been amplified? Why had opportunities for de-escalation been ignored? None of these questions accused individuals directly, but they threatened institutions. Inside closed rooms, the discussion shifted from content to consequence. Officials did not argue that the document was false. Instead, they debated timing, relevance, risk. The conclusion was clear, even if it was never written down. Releasing the document would weaken credibility without providing any immediate benefit, so it was sealed. The classification was not meant to be permanent, at least not officially. But as years passed, circumstances changed. New leadership arrived. Strategic priorities shifted. Each transition made the document easier to forget and harder to explain. What had once been controversial became inconvenient. Meanwhile, the document continued to circulate quietly within a very limited circle. It influenced thinking without being cited. It softened language in briefings. It introduced caution into assessments. Analysts aware of its conclusions learned to frame their work differently, even if they could not reference the source. In this way, the document achieved influence without visibility. That invisibility was intentional. Public acknowledgement would have forced a reckoning with past assumptions. Silence allowed continuity. The system preferred stability over correction. Years later, when declassification reviews began, the document resurfaced again. This time, the debate was different. The information was no longer sensitive in a tactical sense, but its implications remained uncomfortable. Releasing it would rewrite parts of history that had already settled into official memory. Once again, the decision was made to delay. The document remained classified not because it endangered security, but because it challenged certainty. And uncertainty was something institutions rarely chose to expose. By the time the document reached its final stage of internal circulation, its existence had become a liability. What it contained was not explosive in the traditional sense. There were no confessions, no dramatic revelations, no direct accusations. Instead, it presented a calm, methodical reconstruction of decisions that should never have been made and warnings that had been quietly ignored. The danger was not what the document said, but what it implied. It demonstrated that the system had possessed the necessary information and still failed to act decisively. That implication alone was enough to justify continued classification. Within intelligence circles, the document began to alter behavior without being openly referenced. Analysts who had read it became more cautious in how they framed conclusions. Language grew more restrained. Confidence was tempered with layers of qualification. The document had introduced doubt not about external threats, but about internal judgment. It suggested that certainty, when misplaced, could be more damaging than ignorance. This lesson spread informally, passed through culture rather than instruction. Senior officials debated whether the document should ever be released in any form. Some argued that transparency would strengthen institutions by forcing accountability. Others warned that releasing it would undermine trust, not only in past leadership, but in the intelligence process itself. The concern was that public understanding would simplify what had been a complex and ambiguous situation. Nuance would be lost. Responsibility would be assigned where none could be cleanly defined. As years passed, the document became increasingly detached from the events that inspired it. New generations of analysts encountered it not as a warning about a specific moment, but as an abstract example of institutional failure. Its lessons were absorbed indirectly. Training materials referenced similar scenarios without citation. The document itself remained sealed, known only to a shrinking group of individuals. Externally, historians speculated about unexplained decisions and missed opportunities. Patterns were identified, timelines reconstructed, but without access to the document, conclusions remained incomplete. The absence of definitive evidence allowed competing interpretations to persist. This ambiguity served those who preferred silence. As long as the document remained classified, the narrative remained unsettled. What made continued secrecy possible was the lack of a triggering event. No scandal forced disclosure. No political shift demanded openness. The document had prevented a crisis, but it had also ensured that no resolution would ever be publicly acknowledged. It existed in a space between success and failure, where classification was the safest option. By the time serious discussions about declassification resumed, decades had passed. The individuals involved were retired or deceased. Context had faded. Releasing the document now would answer some questions, but raise others that no one could address. The decision was postponed again, not out of fear, but out of inertia. The document remained where it had always been, locked away, referenced indirectly, shaping behavior without ever being seen. Its influence was real but untraceable, and that perhaps was its final purpose. The document was never meant to change history on its own. It was written as an internal assessment, intended for a limited circle of officials who understood the risks of drawing conclusions too quickly. Yet its contents carried implications so serious that acknowledging them openly would have forced political decisions no one was prepared to make. For decades, the safest solution was silence. The document remained classified not because it was incomplete, but because it was too complete. By the time portions of its existence became known years later, the world had already changed. Political systems collapsed, alliances shifted, and the Cold War ended without the catastrophe the document had warned about. Some believed this meant the threat had been exaggerated. Others understood something more unsettling. The absence of disaster did not disprove the warning. It suggested that restraint, delay, and quiet adjustments had worked. What made the document dangerous was not a single revelation, but the pattern it revealed. It showed how easily assumptions could harden into policy, how intelligence assessments could escalate tension without intention, and how close decision-makers had come to acting on interpretations rather than facts. Admitting this publicly would have required acknowledging how fragile strategic stability truly was. Internally, the document influenced more than was ever recorded. Language changed, procedures slowed, analysts became more cautious about certainty. Decision-makers demanded broader context before action. None of this was announced as reform. It happened gradually, shaped by the fear of repeating a near mistake no one was allowed to name. The document remained classified because it challenged the image of control. It showed that stability during the Cold War was not always the result of strength or dominance, but often of hesitation, doubt, and decisions not taken. That truth did not fit public narratives on either side. When historians later searched for evidence of turning points, they found none. The document left no visible trace in speeches, treaties, or official doctrine. Its influence existed only in what did not happen. No escalation, no irreversible decision, no final step forward. In the end, the document was not hidden to protect secrets from the enemy. It was hidden to protect institutions from confronting how close they had come to losing control of their own assumptions. Some documents are classified not because they reveal too much about the other side, but because they reveal too much about ourselves. That is why it remained sealed for decades, not because it was irrelevant, but because it worked.